welcome to the debate. That email, the short, sharp notification that a meeting has been rescheduled due to a conflict, it's probably the most ubiquitous yet most analyzed piece of modern organizational communication. It seems so logistical on the surface, but it's really a critical intersection. It reveals so much about organizational, interpersonal, and operational dynamics.
It is. It's absolutely a moment of truth. You can tell a huge amount about a company, a culture, just by how it handles one simple calendar conflict.
Imagine we're talking about the rescheduled Q3 strategy review a meeting with critical cross-functional leadership, compliance checkpoints, the whole thing. The central question then really boils down to the strategic hierarchy of implications. When you have to manage that reschedule, where should the primary focus lie? Is it on preserving workflow and project momentum, the organizational stakes?
Or is it on maintaining relational trust and culture, the interpersonal and, frankly, the leadership stakes?
Right. And I will argue that for high-stakes projects like that Q3 review, the imperative has to be strategic workflow continuity. It just has to be.
And I couldn't disagree more forcefully. I maintain that without prioritizing the cultural and relational dynamics, the impact on the 20 people whose calendars just exploded, any short-term workflow fix is inherently fragile. It's just unsustainable.
I recognize the value of culture. I do. But we are stewards of the deliverable first. The core objective of rescheduling is always strategic risk mitigation. A critical meeting isn't moved capriciously. It's done to preserve alignment, to ensure essential decisions are still made, and to prevent the entire project from just drifting off course. So the immediate priority must be minimizing that workflow disruption. We have to mitigate the delays, reduce the bottlenecks, and preserve continuity by providing alternate channels for progress, whether that's, shared documents, asynchronous updates, or just interim instructions for the team. The new meeting time has to be chosen with purpose, prioritizing the project's objective and maximizing productivity over mere convenience. We have to protect the engine.
That analysis, while it's logically sound on a project level, it completely ignores the human cost of that disruption. That Q3 review being rescheduled, especially last minute, instantly tests the culture. It tests the competency of the leadership team. Time is the most valuable resource we give an organization, and poor handling of that change, vague communication, or worse, making the team feel unimportant can just severely erode credibility. It damages working relationships. The symbolic communication here matters most. The way the conflict is framed, that shapes how employees interpret urgency, responsibility, and what the company truly values. Leadership has to lead with humility and ownership here, apologizing appropriately and validating the impact on others. Just acknowledging that this increases cognitive load, that it adds decision fatigue, that is crucial for maintaining psychological safety. And that is the true foundation of long-term efficiency.
I see why you emphasize that human signal. I really do. But let me offer a different perspective on what that rescheduling event actually reveals. I would argue it primarily reveals the organization's internal hierarchy of priorities. When the conflict involves a senior VP or, in our scenario, some major compliance issue that must be addressed immediately, well, the decision to reschedule the Q3 review implicitly signals which activity is strategically more important. This isn't opaque leadership. It's a practical, logistical revelation of the organization's structure and where resources are being strategically allocated. It's just a necessary function of prioritization under stress.
See, but prioritization is not merely logistical, and I certainly don't buy that it's just a neutral revelation of structure. The source material is very clear on this. The way the conflict is communicated, the tone, that's what employees interpret as much as the why. If that communication is disrespectful or abrupt or vague, the rescheduling exposes a deficient leadership style, and that reveals far more about long-term professional norms than one single strategic trade-off. What good is a perfect strategic hierarchy if the leadership uses it to justify disrespecting the time of 80% of the team? That short-term efficiency, it quickly turns into turnover risk and long-term organizational debt.
But is it focusing so much on that relational impact overlook the simple operational requirement to keep the engine running, let's bring it back to the operational side. Since the Q3 strategy review is a checkpoint for major deliverables, the operational focus has to be on coordination, the strategic solution. It focuses purely on the deliverable. We have to provide interim actions, sharing pre-read documents, specific data points, asynchronous updates. Just to avoid creating an information vacuum, we are simply solving the immediate problem created by the schedule change to ensure the project maintains its momentum. If we stop the clock to have a culture conversation, the project dies.
That's a compelling argument for triage, but I worry that interim actions are just band-aids. They mask a systemic illness. Chronic calendar conflicts are not random events. They are data. Repeated rescheduling indicates deep organizational weaknesses, overloaded calendars, poor planning, or a cultural dysfunction where people prioritize their own schedules over collective goals. Focusing solely on a quick fix, like an async update, ignores the need for strategic time management. A mature organization should be leaving structured time buffers around critical meetings like the Q3 review. That signals a measured time management culture. If we only focus on the short-term operational fix, we never address the systemic disease that caused the conflict in the first place. And that just guarantees this will happen again next quarter.
Systemic change is a long-term goal, though. We have to address the immediate crisis. And that brings us back to communication logistics. Speed of information flow it's absolutely crucial. Delayed notifications reduce flexibility and create massive calendar cascades. Think about it. A conflict involving one senior leader can force 6 different cross-functional teams to shuffle their entire day. That proves that one calendar entry controls enormous organizational drag. So, best practice advises communicating early even without all the details, because a little uncertainty about the time is better than a last-minute surprise that ruins multiple people's entire day. We have to mitigate that logistical risk immediately.
I understand the fear of the calendar cascade, I really do, but I'm just not convinced that speed should trump clarity and emotional intelligence. Ambiguity generated by rushing a vague, quick notice actually compromises relational trust far more than a slight delay for verification would. Rescheduling a critical meeting requires crystal clear communication about the new time, the location, any required prep. And what's more, the message itself requires some emotional intelligence. Avoiding excessive justification. I mean, we don't need a 5-paragraph excuse, while providing just enough detail to build trust without oversharing. That's the key. Rushing a 2-line notice to save 2 hours of calendar time is so often offset by the weeks of relational cleanup and confusion it causes later. If people assume the conflict was trivial, you've just sacrificed trust for speed.
That's a fair point on the quality of the communication, but my operational concern remains centered on the efficiency of the outcome. We are still responsible for the Q3 deliverables.
And that leads us to the final, and perhaps the most contentious point, the impact of inclusivity. If the newly proposed time for the Q3 review excludes key stakeholders, maybe the head of compliance or a critical partner from sales, they may feel sidelined. That leads to a status imbalance and it undermines inclusion. An effective leader has to consult with those key partners before proposing a new time. Failing to do so signals that the organization prioritizes the convenience of the few over collaboration, which just damages the long-term work culture.
While I certainly value the principle of inclusivity, of course, the strategic goal here is reaffirming the meeting's priorities. By proactively rescheduling rather than just canceling the review, the leader is signaling that the meeting is still strategically important. Sometimes risk mitigation, the necessity of avoiding an unproductive meeting without the highest-ranking decision-makers, it just necessitates a temporary trade-off in attendance. And we manage that trade-off with clear, comprehensive asynchronous updates for the excluded parties, ensuring they are debriefed and their input is gathered later. We cannot let the perfect inclusivity be the enemy of project momentum.
But that assumes the asynchronous update is a true substitute for real-time collaboration. Often excluding key partners just means the meeting will have to be revisited anyway, or that key decisions will be deferred. It creates a false sense of momentum. It's a delicate balance, yes, but ignoring the consultation process to save an hour of scheduling time only compounds the perceived cultural slight.
So to summarize my position, The focus on organizational stakes is just the pragmatic choice when you're dealing with high-stakes items like the Q3 strategy review. A successful reschedule preserves continuity and project momentum, which at the end of the day are the ultimate metrics of organizational efficiency. The logistics and operational consequences have to dictate the immediate response to ensure decisions still get made.
And to summarize mine, I believe the focus on interpersonal and cultural stakes is foundational to any sustainable success. A well-handled reschedule preserves a trust, it demonstrates mature leadership competence. Conversely, poor handling damages working relationships, it increases cognitive load, and it signals a lack of professionalism. And ultimately, that undermines the long-term collaboration needed for any successful workflow, making those short-term gains basically meaningless.
It is clear that this one situation, a simple meeting conflict, is a really powerful testbed for organizational maturity. It requires leaders to constantly navigate that intersection of logistical necessity and human dynamics.
Agreed. The insights you can glean from analyzing how an organization handles even a single rescheduled meeting, they offer really valuable data on its professionalism, its priorities, and its long-term health. Thank you for this. It was a productive exchange.